Some nights are defined by success, by multi-million-dollar deals sealed with a handshake over vintage wine. For Alessandro Di Valenti, the titan of Italian couture, tonight was meant to be one of those nights. Instead, it was a catastrophe. In a glittering New York restaurant, his empire teetered on the edge of humiliation, with a deal collapsing thanks to laughably incompetent service. His rage, cold and precise as a stiletto, was about to ruin someone's career. He was a man who commanded perfection, and he was about to unleash a storm. But he never expected the one person standing in his way, a simple waitress with tired eyes, to stop him dead with 4 words spoken in a flawless, aristocratic Italian that hadn't been heard in his family for generations. The air in La Serenissima was thick with the scent of white truffle oil, aged Parmesan, and impending failure. It was a smell Alessandro Di Valenti was entirely unfamiliar with. Seated at the restaurant's most coveted table, a secluded alcove overlooking the frantic ballet of the open kitchen, he felt a vein throbbing at his temple, a telltale sign of a composure stretched to its breaking point. Alessandro was not a man given to public displays of anger. His fury was a far more dangerous thing. It was a quiet, suffocating pressure that froze the air around him, a promise of calculated retribution. At 42, he was the 3rd-generation patriarch of Valenti Couture, a global fashion empire built on the unshakable foundation of Italian craftsmanship and ruthless precision. He didn't just sell clothes, he sold a legacy of perfection. Tonight, that legacy was being tarnished by lukewarm risotto. Across the table, Mr. Thompson and Ms. Davies, the stoic American investors he was attempting to woo for a landmark expansion deal, were doing their best to pretend they hadn't noticed. They were old money from Boston, people who appreciated subtlety, but even they couldn't ignore the cascade of errors that had defined the evening. It had begun with the wine. Alessandro had personally selected a 1998 Gaggia Barbaresco, a wine that spoke of heritage and patience. The young waiter, a boy with more gel in his hair than sense in his head, had presented it clumsily, his thumb smudging the hallowed label. He then proceeded to butcher the cork, leaving fragments floating in the first pour. Alessandro had dismissed him with a glacial stare, requesting a new bottle and a new server. The replacement was a harried-looking woman who seemed to be managing half the restaurant on her own. The appetizers arrived 30 minutes late. Mr. Thompson's vitello tonato was correct, but Ms. Davies, who had requested the burrata, was presented with a plate of calamari. She was allergic to shellfish. Alessandro's smile never faltered, but his eyes, the color of dark espresso, grew harder. He had chosen La Serenissima specifically because its owner, a man he knew from Milan, had sworn it was an authentic slice of Italy in the heart of Manhattan. It was meant to be an extension of the Valenti brand, elegant, exclusive, and flawless. Instead, it was a parody. Now the main course. His own osso buco was passable, but the saffron risotto accompanying it was a gummy, tepid insult to Lombardian cuisine. He watched as Mr. Thompson poked tentatively at his sea bass, which was visibly overcooked. "Everything to your liking, Mr. Di Valenti?" Ms. Davies asked, her voice betraying a hint of pity. "The company is exquisite," Alessandro replied, his voice a low, melodic baritone that could charm or chill with equal ease. "It is a shame the establishment cannot rise to the same standard." He placed his fork and knife together on the plate, a silent, damning judgment. The deal was not dead, but it was wounded. These investors equated competence in all things with competence in business. A man who couldn't even command a good meal might not be the man to entrust with $100 million investment. The humiliation was a physical thing, a tightening in his chest. This wasn't just a bad dinner. It was a reflection on him. He had brought them here. He had vouched for this place. The waitress returned, her face pale and beaded with sweat. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Her name tag read Daisy. She looked exhausted, her simple black uniform doing little to hide the weariness in her posture. Alessandro didn't look at her. He looked past her, at the chaos in the kitchen, at the manager schmoozing with a table of celebrities, oblivious to the train wreck occurring at the most important table in his restaurant. "No," Alessandro said, the single word landing like a chip of ice. "Nothing is all right. Please have the manager come to my table." Now, the waitress Daisy flinched. He's very busy, sir. Perhaps I can. I do not believe I was offering a suggestion, Alessandro cut in, his voice dropping even lower. The air grew cold. I am the man who is paying for this performance. I will speak to the ringmaster. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, a signal that the situation was escalating beyond the bounds of professional comfort. Alessandro, perhaps we can just call it a night. But it was too late. The insult was too deep. This wasn't about the food anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the name Valenti being associated with this level of amateurism. He excused himself from the table, his movements fluid and predatory. He wasn't going to wait for the manager. He was going to find him. Every head in the restaurant turned to watch as the impeccably dressed Italian with thunder in his eyes strode towards the back of the house, a man on a collision course with someone's career. The polished marble floor felt like it was cracking under the force of Alessandro's stride. His vision narrowed, focused on the frosted glass door at the end of the hall marked management. The muffled sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, faded into a dull roar in his ears. All that remained was the cold, clear bell of his anger. He had built his empire on a simple creed his grandfather, the original Niccolò Valenti, had taught him. God is in the details. A loose thread on a cuff, a slightly misaligned seam, a corked bottle of wine. They were not small mistakes. They were symptoms of a greater disease, carelessness. And carelessness was the one sin Alessandro could not forgive. The manager of La Serenissima, a man named Giorgio, would learn that lesson tonight. He was 10 feet from the door when a figure stepped into his path. It was the waitress, Daisy. She stood there, a small, determined obstacle against his towering rage. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her knuckles white. She looked terrified, but she didn't move. "Sir, please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't. I'll fix it. I will personally cover the cost of your entire meal. Please just don't go in there." Alessandro stopped, but only out of sheer surprise. He stared down at her. In the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, he could see her more clearly. She wasn't a girl, but a woman, likely in her late 20s. There was a fineness to her features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, a sweep of dark lashes over eyes the color of moss, that seemed out of place with her worn-out demeanor. But it was the desperation in those eyes that held his attention. "You will cover it?" he asked, his voice laced with a dangerous amusement. "My dear, the cost of this meal is irrelevant. What is relevant is the cost to my reputation, the insult to my guests. Do you think a few $100s can erase that?" "I know it can't," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "But Mr. Giorgio, he's not a bad man. He's just overwhelmed. We are short-staffed. The new chef is, difficult. It's not an excuse, I know, but it's the truth. An official complaint from you, it would be devastating for him, for all of us." Alessandro let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Devastating? Good. Incompetence should be devastating. That is how we learn. Now step aside." He made to move past her, but she shifted, blocking his path again. It was an act of such audacious bravery or foolishness that it gave him another moment's pause. "Please, signore," she pleaded, her eyes welling up. "I am begging you." The use of the Italian honorific signore from an American waitress was common in a place like this, a cheap trick to seem authentic. It only annoyed him further. "Do not patronize me with poorly pronounced Italian," he snapped, his patience finally shredding. "You have no idea who I am, and you have no idea the damage you and your circus have caused tonight. Your manager hid in his office while his restaurant burned. He deserves whatever is coming to him. Move. Now." His voice had the sharp crack of a whip. He saw her flinch, her shoulders slumping in defeat. For a second, he thought she would crumble, would step aside and let the execution proceed. He almost wished she would, but she didn't. She took a deep breath, her chin lifting just a fraction. The terror in her eyes was replaced by something else, something he couldn't quite place. A flicker of defiance, a spark of pride. When she spoke again, her voice was different. The slight, nondescript American accent was gone, stripped away to reveal something else entirely. It was replaced by a pure, crystalline Italian, So perfect and so formal it was like hearing a ghost. It wasn't the functional modern Italian of Rome or Milan. It was the rich melodic cadence of Florence, tinged with an aristocratic precision that was almost archaic. It was the Italian of Dante, of the Medicis, of his own grandmother. Perdoni la mia presunzione, signore, she said, her voice clear and steady, each syllable perfectly formed. Ma l'errore è stato nostro, e la colpa ricade su di me. The words washed over him, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Forgive my presumption, sir, but the error was ours, and the fault falls upon me. It wasn't just the words. It was the grammar, the deferential yet dignified tone, the flawless accent that spoke of private tutors and centuries of breeding. It was the kind of Italian one couldn't learn in a class or by watching movies. It had to be lived. It was inherited. Alessandro Di Valenti, a man who was never surprised, stood frozen in the hallway of a New York restaurant, his rage evaporating like mist in the face of an impossible mystery. He stared at the waitress, at this Daisy, and saw her for the first time. The tired uniform, the frantic energy, it all fell away. All he could see was the woman who spoke the language of his soul as if it were her own. His anger was gone. In its place was a single burning question. Who in God's name are you? The silence in the hallway was absolute. Alessandro felt as if a switch had been flipped inside him. The blinding white light of his anger instantly replaced by the focused, analytical beam of his curiosity. He studied the woman before him, his mind racing, cataloging the contradictions. The cheap polyester uniform and the priceless, perfect Florentine accent. The exhausted posture of a service worker and the innate dignity in her speech. He answered her in the same language, his own Italian shifting from his usual clipped, businesslike Milanese tone to the more formal register she had used. Lei parla la mia lingua come una nativa, he said slowly, his voice a low rumble. You speak my language like a native. Ma non una nativa qualsiasi, una fiorentina. But not just any native, a Florentine. A flicker of panic crossed her face, a brief, unguarded expression that confirmed his suspicion before she could mask it. She had revealed far more than she intended. I studied, she stammered, reverting to English, in college, a semester abroad. Alessandro smiled, a thin, knowing smile that did not reach his eyes. Un semestre non le insegna quella cadenza, he replied, continuing in Italian, forcing her hand. A semester does not teach you that cadence. That is the accent of the old families, of the hills of Fiesole, not of a university classroom. He watched her struggle, a war playing out behind her moss-green eyes. She was trapped. To continue speaking English would be a blatant admission of her deception. To continue in Italian would be to reveal more of herself. She chose the latter, her voice now quiet and resigned. Lei ha un orecchio molto fine, signore. You have a very fine ear, sir. Ho un orecchio per l'autenticità, he corrected her gently. I have an ear for authenticity. It is my business. He took a small step closer, not to intimidate, but to lower his voice, creating a pocket of intimacy in the sterile hallway. E lei, signorina? Lei è la cosa più autenticamente italiana che ho incontrato in questa città, il che rende la sua attuale professione un mistero affascinante. And you, miss, you are the most authentically Italian thing I have encountered in this city, which makes your current profession a fascinating mystery. Her name tag said Daisy. It was a beautiful name, but it felt incomplete, an alias. Who are you? He asked, switching back to English, the question direct and stripped of all pretense. She lowered her gaze to the scuffed toes of her black shoes. My name is Daisy Vance. I am a waitress, and I am the one who mixed up the orders tonight. I confused table 7 with yours. The calamari was for them. Ms. Davies' burrata went to a man who thought he'd won the lottery. The delay with the appetizers was my fault. I take full responsibility. It was a well-rehearsed confession, but he waved it away with an impatient flick of his wrist. I no longer care about the calamari. I care about the woman who stood up to me in the dialect of the Tuscan nobility to defend a hapless manager. People like you are not waitresses. So I ask you again, Daisy Vance, Who are you? She remained silent, her jaw tight. She was a vault. But Alessandro was a master locksmith. Very well, he said, changing tactics. He pulled a slim, platinum business card case from the inner pocket of his tailored Brioni jacket. He extracted a card and held it out to her. This disaster of a dinner has cost me something far more valuable than money. It has cost me face. My investors are leaving tomorrow morning for Tokyo. I have one chance to salvage this. A breakfast meeting at 8 a.m. at the Carlyle. My usual translator is in Milan with the flu. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. I require a translator, someone who understands not just the words but the nuance, the culture, someone who can speak to my heritage, my commitment to quality, in a way that will resonate with them. I need someone who is, for lack of a better word, authentic. Her eyes lifted from the floor and met his. She understood immediately. You're offering me a job? She asked, incredulous. I am offering you a lifeline, he corrected. A one-time engagement. 8 a.m. tomorrow. You will be compensated handsomely for your time. More than you make here in a month. All you have to do is show up and be the Florentine woman you are so desperately trying to hide. It was a test, a gamble. He was dangling the key to her cage, wanting to see if she would dare to take it. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the risk of exposure versus the promise of escape, even for a few hours from the drudgery of her current life. He also knew she needed the money. The worn-out shoes, the faded uniform, the deep-seated exhaustion in her face. They told a story of struggle. Slowly, as if it might burn her, she reached out and took the card. Her fingers were slender and elegant, but her nails were short and unpolished, the hands of someone who worked. The Carlyle, 8 a.m., she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at the embossed crest on the card. Valenti, Milano. A wave of something, recognition, fear, washed over her features before she concealed it again. Do not be late, Alessandro said. It was not a request. He turned without another word and walked back towards his table, the confrontation with the manager forgotten, replaced by a far more compelling puzzle. His investors looked up as he approached, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. Is everything resolved? Mr. Thompson asked. Alessandro's lips curved into the first genuine smile of the evening. Yes, he said, his gaze drifting back down the hallway where the mysterious waitress had disappeared. I believe I have just found the solution to all of our problems. The next morning, the lobby of the Carlyle Hotel was a symphony of quiet power. The air smelled of money, fresh lilies, and floor wax. At precisely 7:55 a.m., Daisy Vance walked through the revolving doors, and for a moment, she looked as if she belonged. She was no longer the harried waitress from La Serenissima. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that fell just below the knee. It was not new. Alessandro's sharp eye noticed the slightest bit of wear at the cuffs, but it was clearly of high quality. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon, and she wore a single strand of pearls. The only makeup she wore was a touch of lipstick. She looked like a young woman who had stepped out of a Fellini film, a vision of understated European class. She was transformed. Alessandro, who had been waiting near the concierge desk, felt a jolt of confirmation. This was her natural habitat. The restaurant had been the costume. This was the reality. Signorina Vance, he said, approaching her, you are punctual, an excellent quality. She inclined her head, a gesture of polite deference that was both practiced and natural. Lei mi ha dato un'opportunità, signor Di Valenti. La puntualità è il minimo che potessi offrirle in cambio. You gave me an opportunity, Mr. Di Valenti. Punctuality is the least I could offer in return. Her use of Italian was deliberate, a signal that she was ready to play the part he had hired her for. He led her to the restaurant where his investors were already seated. He introduced her simply as Ms. Vance, my associate and translator, and watched as Mr. Thompson and Ms. Davies took her in. Their approval was immediate and palpable. Where they had seen a flustered waitress the night before, they now saw a poised, intelligent woman who radiated competence. The breakfast was a masterclass in quiet diplomacy. Daisy was flawless. She didn't just translate Alessandro's words, she channeled his intent. When he spoke of Valenti Couture's commitment to materials, she elaborated in English with a brief, eloquent anecdote about the silk weavers of Lake Como. When he described his vision for the new American market, she found the perfect American idioms to convey his passion without losing his European gravitas. She moved between the two languages with the seamless grace of a weaver at a loom, building a bridge of understanding between two different worlds. At one point, Miss Davies asked a complex question about supply chain ethics. Alessandro began his answer in Italian, speaking of the generational relationships his family had with their artisans, the botteghe, where skills were passed from father to son. Daisy listened intently, then turned to Miss Davies. Mr. De Valenti believes that true luxury cannot be built on exploitation, she translated, her voice clear and firm. The Valenti supply chain is not a chain at all. It is a family tree. Every hand that touches a garment is respected, compensated fairly, and is a part of a legacy. To compromise on that would be to compromise the soul of the brand. Alessandro sat back, stunned. She had not just translated his words. She had distilled his entire philosophy into a single, powerful statement. She understood. She didn't just understand the language. She understood the world it came from. By the time the coffee was cold, the deal was saved. Mr. Thompson clapped Alessandro on the shoulder as they stood to leave. Your associate is brilliant, Alessandro. She clarified things in a way that truly resonated. You have a gem there. After they had departed in a town car for JFK, Alessandro and Daisy stood alone on the sidewalk outside the hotel. The morning sun cast long shadows down Madison Avenue. You were magnificent, he said, the words coming out with more sincerity than he'd intended. I was translating, she replied, deflecting the praise. No, he insisted, you were representing. You understand what Valenti is. You feel it. He looked at her, the mystery of her identity nagging at him more than ever. The dress you are wearing, it is a beautiful piece. The cut is exceptional. She instinctively touched the fabric of her sleeve. It was a gift, a long time ago. The stitching on the cuff, he continued, his voice soft. The double-fold inverted seam, it is a signature. Only one other house in Italy uses it. He let the statement hang in the air, a final, inescapable piece of evidence. He watched as the blood drained from her face. She knew exactly what he was saying. The double-fold seam was a trademark, a quiet boast of quality known only to the highest echelons of the fashion world. It was the signature of Valenti Couture's oldest and most bitter rival, Rossellini. The House of Rossellini from Florence, he said, his voice flat, founded by Niccolò Rossellini, a brilliant but ruthless man, a man my grandfather despised. He held her gaze, the puzzle pieces clicking into place with cold, hard certainty. You are not Daisy Vance. Vance is your mother's maiden name, perhaps? An anglicized version of something else? It doesn't matter. What matters is that I know what you are. You are a Rossellini. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. She simply stood there on the bustling New York sidewalk, her carefully constructed new life shattered by the one man on earth who was uniquely equipped to see through her disguise. Why, he asked, the question laced with 1,000 others. Why is the heiress to the Rossellini fortune serving calamari in a second-rate restaurant in Manhattan? Her composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Because, she whispered, her voice choked with a pain that was clearly real and profound. It is better than the gilded cage he built for me. The story, when it came, was not a flood, but a slow, painful trickle. Alessandro took her to a small anonymous coffee shop, miles away from the prying eyes of the Upper East Side. He sat opposite her in a cramped booth, a silent observer as she dismantled the fortress she had built around herself. Her name was not Daisy Vance. It was Daisy Rossellini. She was the only grandchild of Niccolò Rossellini, the formidable and tyrannical patriarch of the Rossellini fashion empire. She was, for all intents and purposes, a princess of the industry, raised in a sprawling Florentine villa amidst priceless art and the scent of expensive leather. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, she said, staring into her untouched cup of coffee. But it was a prison. Every meal was a lesson. Every dress was a uniform. Every friend was vetted. Her grandfather, she explained, was a man obsessed with legacy. With Daisy having lost her parents in a car accident when she was a child, Niccolo had funneled all his ambition and control onto her. He saw her not as a granddaughter, but as the future of his company, a strategic asset to be managed and eventually merged. The breaking point had come 6 months ago. Niccolo, now in his 80s and in failing health, had arranged her marriage. It was not a suggestion, it was a decree. The groom-to-be was Marco Di Stefano, the brutish heir to a massive textile conglomerate. The man was known throughout Italy for his volatile temper and his unsavory appetites. He looked at me like I was a deed to a property, Daisy said, a shudder running through her. And my grandfather didn't care. The merger would have made Rossellini untouchable. It would have secured his legacy. My happiness was an irrelevant detail. She had pleaded, argued, and finally she had defied him. The night before the engagement was to be formally announced at a grand party at the Villa Rossellini, she had packed a single bag, emptied a secret bank account her mother had left for her, and vanished. She had a fake ID she had procured years earlier, a desperate teenage dream of escape she never thought she'd use. She flew to New York, a city where she could disappear, and took the name Daisy Vance. I wanted to be anonymous, she explained, her voice raw. I wanted a life where my worth wasn't tied to my last name. I wanted to be tired from working, not from pretending, serving tables. It was honest. It was real. No one knew me. No one wanted anything from me. Alessandro listened without interruption, a storm of conflicting emotions brewing within him. The Rossellinis were the enemy. Niccolo Rossellini had nearly ruined his own grandfather 60 years ago in a ruthless patent dispute over a new weaving technique. The feud between their families was the stuff of industry legend, a cold war fought on runways and in boardrooms for decades. This woman, this Daisy, was supposed to be his rival. But as he listened to her story, he felt no sense of triumph. He saw no enemy. He saw a young woman who had been suffocated by the same world of legacy and expectation that he navigated every day. He, too, had felt the immense pressure of his name, the weight of his grandfather's shadow. The difference was, he had been trained to embrace it, to wield it as a weapon. She had only wanted to escape it. Your grandfather must be looking for you, he stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded grimly. He has private investigators everywhere. Every day I wake up expecting to see one of his men waiting outside my apartment. That's why I panicked last night. When you looked at me, you have the same authority he does. I thought for a moment you were one of them. It was a chilling thought. He, Alessandro Di Valenti, mistaken for a common thug in the employ of Niccolo Rossellini. Yet he understood. They were cut from the same cloth, these patriarchs. And what now, he asked. You can't be a waitress forever. They will find you. I don't know, she whispered, looking helpless for the first time. I have enough money to last a few more months, maybe. Then, I don't know. An idea began to form in Alessandro's mind, an idea so audacious, so contrary to a lifetime of ingrained animosity that it took his own breath away. It was illogical, it was dangerous, but it felt right. You said you wanted a life where you earned your place, he began, leaning forward. You proved your worth this morning, not as a translator, as a strategist. You understand the soul of this business? It's in your blood, whether you like it or not. He paused, choosing his next words with surgical precision. My offer of employment still stands. Not for a day, permanently. Come work for me, for Valenti. Daisy stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Work for you? A Rossellini working for a Valenti? It's impossible. It's a betrayal of everything. My grandfather would... Your grandfather wants to cage you, Alessandro interjected, his voice firm. I am offering you a shield. He would never think to look for you inside the walls of his greatest rival. It is the one place on earth you would be truly invisible, the perfect hiding place. He let the logic of it sink in. She would be hidden in plain sight, her skills utilized, earning her own way, all under the protection of the Valenti name. It was a perfect, ironic solution. But there was more to it than that, a deeper, unstated reason that Alessandro was only just beginning to admit to himself. He was utterly captivated by her courage, her intelligence, her hidden strength. The ancient feud with her family suddenly seemed like a foolish relic of the past. In front of him was the future. "You would do that?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Why? Why would you help me?" Alessandro looked at her, the woman who had doused the fire of his rage with 4 words in perfect Italian, who had saved his deal, and who had shown him a vulnerability that resonated with a lonely part of his own soul. "Because," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "authenticity is my business. And you, Daisy Rossellini, are the most authentic person I have met in a very long time. And frankly, it would give me immense pleasure to thwart Niccolo Rossellini one last time." A flicker of a smile, the first he had ever seen, touched her lips. For the first time since she fled Florence, Daisy saw not a dead end, but a future. A dangerous, complicated, and utterly unexpected future. Daisy's first day at Valenti Couture's North American headquarters was like stepping into an alternate reality. The 50-story skyscraper on Fifth Avenue was a monument to the Valenti aesthetic. Sleek lines of black marble, cool chrome, and vast panes of glass that offered godlike views of Central Park. The air was perfumed with a custom scent, a blend of leather and bergamot that whispered of exclusivity. It was a world away from the smell of stale beer and fried calamari at La Serenissima. It was also terrifyingly familiar. Alessandro introduced her to his executive team as Daisy Vance, a specialist consultant in brand strategy with a deep understanding of the European market. The lie was smooth and plausible. Her performance at the breakfast meeting had already become the stuff of office legend. No one questioned it. No one, that is, except Sofia Romano. Sofia was Alessandro's chief operating officer, a fiercely intelligent woman with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and an unwavering loyalty to the Valenti family. She had been Alessandro's mentor when he first took over the company, and she saw everything. She greeted Daisy with a polite but cool smile, her analytical eyes missing nothing. "Ms. Vance," Sofia had said, her tone professional but laced with steel, "your Italian is remarkable. Where did you say you studied?" "Florence," Daisy replied, her heart pounding. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. Sofia's smile didn't waver. "Of course. Only the Florentines are so proud of their perfect diction." It was a warning shot. Sofia was suspicious. She could sense that Daisy was more than she appeared, and she would be watching. Alessandro gave Daisy an office next to his own, a glass-walled space that felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. Her first task was to analyze the marketing campaign for the upcoming fall collection. As she immersed herself in the work, something remarkable happened. The part of her she had tried to suppress for so long, the Rossellini part, began to emerge. She had an instinctive understanding of the fabrics, a natural eye for silhouette and color. She could look at a design sketch and immediately identify its strengths and weaknesses. She could read a market report and see the story between the numbers. This world was her native language, and she had been starving herself of it. One afternoon, she was reviewing the lookbook for the new collection when she found a flaw. A series of evening gowns, the centerpiece of the collection, used a particular type of Venetian lace. She walked into Alessandro's office without knocking. He was on the phone speaking in rapid-fire Italian. He saw the look on her face, murmured a quick goodbye, and hung up. "What is it?" he asked. "The lace," she said, pointing to a photograph. "It's beautiful, but it won't hold. The weave is too delicate for the weight of the beading. After a few hours of wear, especially under hot lights, it will start to sag. By the end of an evening, the silhouette will be ruined." Alessandro frowned, pulling up the supplier specifications on his computer. "Our master tailor approved it. He said the tension tests were excellent." "The tests are done on machines, in a controlled climate," Daisy countered, her passion overriding her caution. "They don't account for body heat, for movement, for perspiration. My grandfather—" She stopped herself, catching the slip. "Go on," Alessandro urged, his eyes intent. "Your grandfather what?" "My grandfather," she continued, taking a breath, "faced this exact problem with a collection in 2016. He used a similar lace. It was a disaster. The dresses looked exquisite on the runway, but were a nightmare for the clients. He had to recall half the collection. He called it his Venetian folly." There was a moment of charged silence. She had just used her intimate knowledge of a Rossellini failure to save a Valenti collection. It was the ultimate act of treason. Alessandro stared at her, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "This is why I hired you," he said softly. He picked up his phone and dialed his head designer in Milan. "Marco, it's Alessandro. We have a problem with the lace on the evening gowns." In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted. She was no longer just a woman he was protecting. She was an asset, a secret weapon. He began to include her in everything: design meetings, financial strategy sessions, even confidential discussions about corporate acquisitions. They developed a rhythm, a shorthand, their minds working in sync. The rivalry that had defined their families for generations was being transmuted into a powerful, unspoken partnership. Their late nights at the office became more frequent, fueled by coffee and a shared obsession with perfection. They would argue fiercely over the shade of a color or the placement of a seam, and in those arguments, Daisy felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She was being seen, truly seen, for her mind, for her talent, not for her name. But the ghost of her past was never far. One evening, as they were packing up, Alessandro's private line rang. His face hardened as he listened. "I see," he said, his voice grim. "Yes, increase the security, everywhere, and run a new background check on everyone hired in the last 6 months. Thank you." He hung up the phone and looked at Daisy, his expression dark. "What is it?" she asked, a familiar cold dread creeping up her spine. "That was my head of security in Milan," Alessandro said. "Niccolo Rossellini arrived in New York this morning. He's staying at the Pierre. He has told the press he is here for private family business." The room suddenly felt airless. Daisy sank into a chair, her hands trembling. He was here. Her grandfather was in the same city. The cage she had escaped was reassembling itself around her. "He knows," she whispered. "Somehow he knows I'm here." Alessandro walked over to the vast window, looking down at the glittering sprawl of the city. "Let him look," he said, his voice a low growl of defiance. "He can search every corner of this city. He will never think to look for his lost princess in the devil's own castle." He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a protective fire that was far more than professional. "You are Daisy Vance, a consultant for Valenti Couture, and I am your employer. He will not touch you. I will not let him." It was a devil's bargain, struck in a moment of fury in a restaurant hallway. But as she looked at Alessandro Di Valenti, the heir to her family's greatest enemy, she realized he was no longer just her shield. He was her only ally, and their war against the past was about to begin. The news of Niccolo Rossellini's arrival in New York hung over the Valenti headquarters like a storm cloud. For Daisy, every unfamiliar face in the lobby, every black car that idled too long on the street below, was a potential threat. She lived in a state of heightened alert, the fragile peace she had found shattered by the proximity of her gilded cage. Alessandro was true to his word. Security around the building, and around Daisy personally, was discreetly but significantly increased. A car service, driven by a man who looked more like a bodyguard than a chauffeur, took her to and from her small apartment in Greenwich Village. She felt safe, but she also felt the walls closing in again. The tension, however, forged an even deeper bond between them. They were co-conspirators in a high-stakes drama. The late nights in the office continued, but the conversations shifted. They spoke less of business and more of their lives, their families, the suffocating weight of the names they carried. Alessandro told her about his father, a brilliant but gentle man who had never wanted the CEO position, preferring the creative side. He spoke of the pressure from his own grandfather to be stronger, more ruthless, to always put the Valenti name first. Daisy, in turn, shared stories of her childhood, of the rare, stolen moments of joy with her parents before the accident, and the long, lonely years under Niccolo's iron-fisted rule. They were two sides of the same coin, one who had run from his legacy and one who had been consumed by it. One evening, a week after Niccolo's arrival, Sofia Romano requested a private meeting with Alessandro. Daisy watched from her office as Sofia entered his, her posture rigid, a file clutched in her hand. The meeting lasted for over an hour. When Sofia emerged, she shot Daisy a look of pure ice before striding away. A few minutes later, Alessandro appeared in Daisy's doorway. He looked tired, his face etched with strain. Sophia knows, he said without preamble. Not everything, but she knows you're not who you say you are. She ran her own deep background check, found the dead ends, the inconsistencies. She thinks you're a corporate spy, a Rossellini plant sent to steal our designs and ruin the company from within. Daisy's blood ran cold. And you? What did you tell her? I told her she was right about one thing, Alessandro said, walking into her office and shutting the door behind him. You are a Rossellini. Then I told her the truth, all of it. Daisy was speechless. You trusted her with that? I trust Sophia with my life, he said simply, but she is loyal to Valenti above all else. She has given me an ultimatum. You go, or she does. She says your presence here is a risk we cannot afford. A ticking bomb. The words hit Daisy like a physical blow. She had known this couldn't last. She was a liability, a danger to the man who had shown her more kindness than she had ever known. She's right, Daisy said, her voice hollow. I should leave. I'll go tonight. Disappear again. It's the only way to protect you, to protect Valenti. No, Alessandro said, his voice firm. He crossed the room and stood before her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. Sophia is wrong. You are not a risk. You are our greatest asset, and I will not have you run again. He reached out and took her hand. His touch sent a shockwave through her. This is not just about protecting you from your grandfather anymore, Daisy. This is about building something new, together. Before she could process his words, his personal assistant buzzed through on the intercom, her voice tight with panic. Mr. Di Valenti, you need to come to the lobby, now. It's Niccolo Rossellini, he's here. The world stopped. The lion was not just at the gate, he was inside the castle. Alessandro's hand tightened on hers. He looked into her eyes, and in them, she saw not fear, but a cold, hard resolve. Stay here, he commanded. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. He turned and strode out of the office, his back straight, a king going to face his rival. Daisy rushed to the door, locking it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hurried to the glass wall of her office that overlooked the main entrance hall 50 floors below. Down in the black marble expanse, she could see him, a small, frail-looking old man in a perfectly tailored cashmere coat, leaning on a silver-headed cane. But she knew that frail frame housed the will of a tyrant. He was surrounded by Valenti security, but he stood his ground, radiating an aura of absolute authority. Then she saw Alessandro emerge from the elevator bank. He walked calmly across the marble floor, a dark, powerful figure meeting the old, unyielding one. They stood face to face, the past and the future of Italian fashion, the heads of two warring houses, surrounded by silent employees. Daisy couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the tension, the rigid set of their shoulders. Niccolo was gesturing, his voice seemingly sharp and demanding. Alessandro was still, immovable, his answers apparently short and final. The confrontation lasted for 5 agonizing minutes. Then something shifted. Niccolo Rossellini, a man who had never backed down in his life, seemed to deflate. His shoulders slumped. He turned and, without a backward glance, allowed the security guards to escort him out of the building. Moments later, the lock on her office door clicked open. Alessandro stood there, his face unreadable. What did he want? Daisy breathed. He knew, Alessandro said, his voice tight. He has a source inside. Someone told him you were working here. A spy, Daisy whispered. Sophia was right. Yes, Alessandro agreed, but not the one she thought. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. He demanded I turn you over to him. He said you were his property, that our families had an agreement. What did you tell him? Alessandro stepped closer, his gaze softening. He reached up and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. I told him, he said, his voice a low, possessive murmur, that the feud between our families was over, and that a Rossellini was welcome at Valenti, especially one who was about to become my partner. He paused, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. And my wife. Daisy stared at him, her mind reeling. It wasn't a business proposal. It wasn't a strategy. It was a confession, a declaration. In the heart of his empire, with the enemy at the gates, Alessandro Di Valenti was not offering her a shield or a hiding place anymore. He was offering her a home. The war was not over. Her grandfather would not give up so easily. There were spies to be found, alliances to be forged, and a lifetime of rivalry to overcome. But as she looked into Alessandro's eyes, Daisy knew she was done running. She was a Rossellini. He was a Valenti. And together they were about to write the next chapter of their story, not as rivals, but as one. And so, a story that began with a furious billionaire and a disastrous dinner transformed into an epic tale of legacy, escape, and an alliance forged in the heart of a generational war. Daisy Rossellini ran from one gilded cage only to find freedom and a future in the last place she ever expected, the arms of her family's greatest enemy. Their journey is far from over. The wrath of a man like Niccolo Rossellini does not fade easily, and the fashion world is unforgiving. If this story of unexpected twists, hidden identities, and the powerful connection that can bloom in the most unlikely of circumstances captivated you, please let us know. These are the kinds of stories we love to tell. Hit that like button to show your support and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next real-life drama. And please share this video with someone who loves a story where nothing is as it seems. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you think the spy is inside Valenti? Until next time.